Kate Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are on video number 2 of the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. This is a classic in the field of paranormal and ufology, and I decided to revisit it because it's been, well, many decades since I originally read it. It's really an interesting glimpse into the process of modern day ufology. And I hope that you've watched video number 1 and that you'll stick with this, because he's gradually walking into this whole Mothman thing, but he has to give it the foundation from whence it comes. And it's really funny to see the things that don't withstand the test of time, like the way people are all very formally addressed as Mr. and Mrs. And we don't do that anymore so much, not so much in writing about people. And what else? Oh, just flying saucers. Every time I say it, it cracks me up. Okay, let's proceed with where we left off, starting chapter 3, the flutter of black wings. Okay, 1877 to 1880, there was a mysterious man in black in Brooklyn. Now remember, John Keel is the one who invented the term men in black. So this man in black had wings. He did aerial acrobatics over sunbathers on Coney Island. And keep in mind, we're talking about really before airplanes, before we had figured all that out. There was an article in the newspaper, September 18th, 1877, talking about a winged human form, but not a bird, seen September 12th in 1880, also flying to New Jersey. I don't know what that was about. Approximately 1,000 feet up in the air, apparently had wings that were like bat wings and made motions almost as though he were swimming in the air, which seems ludicrous, very odd, and was entirely dressed in black clothing. There was no explanation. This is just a little article in the paper one day. And at the time, gladiators, I just got done doing a thing about Rome. Gliders didn't go far. They didn't traverse any great distance at all. And their trajectory was always down. It wasn't across and up. So people have been trying in the 1880s to build a man-powered, what's called an ornithopter for centuries, but they were really into it in the 1880s. An example of obsession with this would have been Da Vinci, who invented something that looked an awful lot like a helicopter, but an ornithopter would have been something attached to people that they could fly like a bird. And he, in his book, he says, they'd invent these things and the first flight was usually the last. May 2nd of 1962, a man named John Wimpenny flew 993 yards, 5 feet up in the air in England. And apparently this was an accomplishment for a man-propelled glider. An ornithopter, by definition, is propulsion through bird-like movements of wings, not made by a bird. Humans could not copy it, though many have tried. However, there have been sightings of these things during UFO waves. They used the term wave. Eventually, they settled on the term flap. And essentially, it just means a period of time, concentrated time, where there were an unusually large number of sightings in the same basic area at the same time, over the same time period. Often, reports weren't even made. Now, how do they know that it happened if reports weren't made? We'll have to assume word of mouth. In 1905, A titanic white bird is described flying over California. Jay Jackson of Shilsby, California, which is now a ghost town near the Imperial Valley. I did a little research into like, where is that? I've never heard of that. There are two names, Shilsey and Shilsby, and I suspect they're talking about the same thing. It just doesn't exist anymore. But the story is that in 1905, people saw a giant white bird about 1:30 in the morning. And this is the part that's a little less usual. It was attached to a 70-foot long airship with wings. The wings flapped like a bird, and this was an article that was in the Brawley News, which was the newspaper from Brawley, California, August 4th, 1905 edition. The idea of winged beings, that idea is ubiquitous in cultures historically. Top of my head, angels. But if you go back all the way to the Sumerian, not monuments, I don't know what to call them, statues. Yeah, statues. You'll often see they had wings. This tells, his book tells of a 1908 encounter in Russia with a winged entity flying along a river. And the natives of the area, I had forgotten I read this, the natives of the area told this lore of a man who flew along that river over time. This is like the lore of the area. The dog that was with this person who reported it in 1908, their dog was scared to death. Mexico has this mythology, story of something called Icals, Ikals. These are tiny black flying men. They live in caves and they kidnap humans. There's this sort of thread running through earthly global mythology about small mystical creatures who kidnap people. That is a story that's told frequently. In India, there's the Garuda. This is a large creature like a bird that carried Vishnu and Krishna on its back. Native Americans have the thunderbird that carries off the very young and the very old. It has terrifying red eyes and a long tail. I'm going to try to remember to put it in the posts. I hope I remember. The reason I might not remember is I'm recording this early and putting it on a timer because I have things happening, and I can't really do that with the post. If I can, I'll see if I can, and if I can, I'll put it up, but I don't want to make false promises. If I forget, somebody please remind me, because I actually downloaded. I have the picture ready to go. So there's three types of phenomena that we're talking about here. There's the winged man. Then there's the biologically impossible gigantic bird. And then there's the monstrous demon with red eyes, bat wings, and a human body. Are these related? Perhaps they're cousins. I don't know. In 1880, over Coney Island again, there was a winged man seen in a number of places in the area. So this is not the first time it's appeared in that area. July 2nd of 1880, there was a winged man spotted in Louisville, Kentucky. Witnesses said it was a man working machinery, like they visibly could see him trying to get the machinery to work, the wings, and he fluttered out of view. And this was an article in the Courier Journal. There's no follow-up. There's no report of a body attached to mechanical wings. This is not a feat that had been accomplished at that time. So 1880s, hard to say. 1946. Now, 1946 is a paradigm shifting year because This is before the first time the words flying saucer were used. They were applied to a cluster of flying objects seen by a guy, if I remember correctly, was flying a small private plane around the mountains of Washington State looking for a crashed airplane. And he didn't find that. He found these discs, metallic discs, and he coined the phrase flying saucers. It's 1947. So in 46, 16 people in California saw a phenomenon while they were on the roofs of some houses watching a meteor shower. And they saw a bluish white winged object in the sky, like a long airplane with two red lights, and it did leave a contrail, but it wasn't an airplane. The wings moved more like a butterfly, not like a bird. The whole thing had a red glow around it, and it was almost like a gigantic bat. So we have something that wasn't a bat, wasn't a bird, wasn't a butterfly, but it flew with wings, kind of like a butterfly, as big as an airplane. These stories are just so odd. I won't characterize them as crazy. I don't think that every single person who saw something like this was imagining things. I believe they saw something. You might have a different opinion, and that's okay, because we don't know. Just don't know. People will argue, why aren't there photographs? There is some sort of related phenomenon in which even professionals, scientists who set up all kinds of elaborate equipment. Remember Skinwalker Ranch? They had so much trouble. Equipment simply would not work, and there would be nothing wrong with it, but it just would not work. So it seems as though perhaps this energy is camera shy. I don't know. Anyway, other stories. The book has just story after story after story, and I'm trying not to belabor too many names and dates and stuff. But in 1912, in popular astronomy, there was a story. Hang on here, let me find it. A Dr. F. Harris said this in this popular astronomy issue. In the evening of January 27th, 1912, I saw an intensely black object like a crow poised upon the moon. I estimated it at 250 miles long by 50 miles wide. And this guy's an astronomer, which I guess maybe he was using a telescope and he had measurements on it. I cannot but think that a very interesting phenomenon happened, the understatement of the century. December 30th, 1946, a writer in Morro Bay saw a giant bat-like creature. And he says, his name was she says her name was Ella Young. On the golden sky, it looked very black. It came forward head on and had a bat-like appearance owing to the curvature of its wings. I'm not sure if there were motions at the extreme tip of the wings. She says it seemed to be standing still. It just hovered in one place. Then it lowered itself toward the horizon and passed behind a cloud and did not reappear. And immediately afterward, there was a great flush of color spread over the sea. August 47th was the first modern USA UFO wave. And immediately, of course, the government starts shutting everybody up. In 1948, in Chehalis, Washington, a man with silver wings was seen 200 feet over a barn. 4 months later, two men 40 miles away saw a trio of birdmen, very similar to that, 250 feet up. I could plainly see they were men. They wore dark drab flying suits. I couldn't make out their arms, but their legs dangled down. They moved their heads like they were looking around. I couldn't tell if they had goggles on, but their heads looked like they had helmets on. They could not see the faces of these humanoid shapes. On the same day in Caledonia, Illinois, a monster bird bigger than a plane was reported. Numerous similar accounts in this book, and many at the time happened over Illinois. January of 1948, a 12-year-old saw a bird as big as a 529. I think that's an airplane. In Glendale, Illinois, April 4th, a retired Army colonel saw, quote, definitely a bird, not a plane, not a glider, a tremendous size. Over the next few months, many reports from other Illinois cities happened, and then we have a report from St. Louis, and I'm assuming we're speaking about Missouri. I don't think it even really said. Oh, wrong page. Hang on. Page. Here we go. Okay, a doctor, Christine Dolezal. It doesn't say what kind of doctor. Well, associated with the Mississippi School of Aeronautics. She was with a bunch of professors, scientists from the aeronautical school. They observed an awfully big bird at 1,200 feet. One said, I've seen it 3 times in the last 4 days, and that's too much tomfoolery for a man of 50 to take. This is another guy said this. Somebody else said, I thought people who reported seeing these things were bugs, like nuts, until I looked into the sky last night. This is the guy who was an inspector for U.S. Steel. He says it was flapping its wings and moving quite fast at about 3,000 feet altitude, appeared to be illuminated by a dull glow. It looked about the size of a Piper Cub, but there was no engine sound. It was not a plane. I could hardly believe my eyes. So these giant bird stories, they got ignored because there was so much excitement about flying saucers that, you know, ho hum, a giant bird, no big deal. Houston, Texas, 1953. This guy saw a figure of a man with wings like a bat in tight-fitting black clothes, surrounded by an eerie glow. There were 3 people together. One of them says, 6.5 feet tall, perched on a pecan limb, a halo of light. He vanished. He slowly faded out. And then we heard a loud swoosh over the housetops across the street. It was like the white flash of a torpedo-shaped object. Again, in 1961, there was a wave of reports. A Florida pilot was in New York, and he said, I doubted my sanity. It looked like a pterodactyl in the Hudson Valley. In West Virginia, along the Ohio River, now this is where we're going to find most of our action later on in the book. In West Virginia, along the Ohio Valley, a man stepped in front of a car. But it was much larger than a man. This just came off the side of the road and stopped this car. And it was much larger than a normal man. The car slowed down and it stood in the middle of a road. And then a pair of wings unfolded from its back and they practically filled the whole road. It was like a small airplane. Then it took off straight up and disappeared out of sight. And the driver said, I was terrified. I stepped on the gas and we got out of there. Yeah. Keel, the author, refers to Jacques Vallée, and even this early, you know, in the time, Jacques Vallée is in the thick of it. It's great. They got access to Air Force files, including reports of a colonel in the Air Force who talked about a huge bird the size of a plane flying over his car. So we've got military people, pilots and such, reporting these things. So I think it's important to remember that a lot of these people who reported it, who were in the military, had positions of authority or positions of responsibility where they were vetted carefully for mental stability and reliability and personality not tending towards, oh, I don't know, addiction. They were very careful about who they let get into the cockpit of extremely valuable flying machines for the military. So when somebody like that's driving along the road and describes a sighting like a giant bird the size of an airplane, it has to be taken seriously. There's a lot on the line. Their reputation, their career, possibly even their freedom, because depending on where you lived at the particular time, you could be involuntarily committed. So people were reluctant to talk about it. And it's very significant if somebody in the military does talk about it. Many stories in the book, I didn't copy them all. There was even a story of a bunch of soldiers in a bunker in Da Nang in Vietnam in 1969 who saw a flying guy with bat wings. There was a big UFO wave in Vietnam between 68 and 69, and also kind of an epidemic of phantom helicopters. Like they'd see helicopters, but they didn't make helicopter noise, and they were not anybody's helicopters. There was a classic event in England in November of 63. 4 teenagers were walking home at night from a dance, country road, and they noticed a bright star in the night sky. But then it dropped behind the trees, and they suddenly felt cold. And then there was a golden oval object that came out of the trees and moved with them along the road, paced their walk. Then a dark figure emerged from the woods, all dressed in black, but it had no head. It was like a human-sized bat with huge wings. And at that point, they ran. There's more reports of lights in the woods, and investigators found 3 giant footprints. There were more reports of sightings in the woods, those same woods. And investigators finally went to check it out and found footprints. They were 1 inch deep, 2 feet long, and 9 inches wide. There were reports of strange pulsating lights in that area weeks later. And in association between giant black birds and pulsing light phenomena, they were often seen at the same time, around the same time as each other, and of UFO sightings. And although this isn't in the book, I'll just say in passing that when it comes to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, same thing. Strange lights and UFOs seen, often reported at the same time in the same area. So these things kept hanging around and recurring for days, sometimes weeks. They would materialize and then dematerialize. They'd often leave a red glow and would go through the spectrum of colors. It was later observed that these teenagers and other people reported feeling a chill before they saw anything, and that might be microwaves above the infrared as it was materializing. That will be cold. So now we're on chapter 4. It's called Take the Train. I couldn't figure out what this was. It's a quote, and it's really pretty funny. We'll get to it. So in the New Yorker, April 9th of 1966, we have this little story. Oops. A contributor to something called the Talk of the Town, I guess that's like a column, said, flying saucers, we read the official explanations. We read the official explanations with sheer delight, marveling at their stupendous inadequacy. Marsh gas, indeed. Our theory is that flying saucers are not of this earth. The beings who control them are attempting to make contact with man in the gentlest possible fashion. Okay, where am I here? Isaac Asimov was a little more cautious. He had something very interesting to say. He said, I'm told, though, that so many people have seen objects that look like spaceships, that there must be something in it. Meaning not in the spaceships necessarily, something in the reports that maybe they're true. Maybe there is, but think of all the people in history of the world who've seen ghosts and spirits and angels. It's not what you see that is suspect, but how you interpret what you see. That was very interesting. Baltimore, 1966. Dr. E. Walsh, and the executive secretary of the National Aeronautics and Space Council. This is the funny quote. He said, so many airline pilots report seeing them, meaning UFOs. That's why I take the train. In 1966, there were flying saucers all over the media. Going out to hunt UFOs became, and they weren't called UFOs quite yet, they were called flying saucers. It became like a national sport. People were always outside looking for flying saucers. March of 66, Mrs. Kelly, we're so formal. Mrs. Kelly was sitting in her car by the school, waiting for her kids to come out of school at Point Pleasant. We're back in West Virginia where that bridge disaster was. And she saw a metallic disc hovering over the playground. It had an open, like a port door open, with a man standing outside the door, except he wasn't standing on anything. He was floating in the air in front of the empty doorway. He was wearing a silver unitard. He had long silver hair, and he was intently watching the playground. While she was looking at him, she got distracted because her kids got in the car. She saw them get in the car. When she looked up, he was completely gone. So the book tells about numerous I saw metallic discs stories in and around Point Pleasant. Also, other places, Salt Lake City, July of 66, a whole bunch of people, I think in a Mormon church parking lot, saw a bird as big as a Piper cub go by. September 1st of 1966, Mississippi, a whitish man-shaped flying object was just flying around the area all day, up and down. It wasn't a balloon. It was controlling its own direction and speed, but it was just sort of tooling around the sky. So Keel discusses the fact that these stories are very old. This is nothing new. Now we're venturing into Zachariah Sitchin territory. We're venturing into Paul Wallace territory. The notion that so many cultural stories, mythologies, even religious scriptures are actually talking about something similar. So he gives some examples. 3,000 years ago, Ethiopian literature was discussing this. He said, Xenophanes, who I believe is Greek, from the 6th century BC, a philosopher, he refers to the Ethiopian gods from the sky. Not to mention the Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Sumerian gods, Native American gods. Other ancient civilizations saw giant hairy demons who left footprints and caused physical damage to things where they had been. They called them a Greek word that translates to chimera in Greek. I don't think it even said what that meant. I should have looked it up. I'm going to assume it means like some kind of demonic illusion, some kind of weird illusion. It's accompanied by lights that change colors up and down the entire visible spectrum. And that's why these odd, spirity, weird entities are called specters. They often appear with the smell of rotten eggs, which is hydrogen sulfide. And he makes the observation that in ancient scripture, they called it fire and brimstone. This has also been smelled around some UFO ET sightings as well. He said, let's look at the stories of angels who descended on luminous clouds, and ETs are descending on shiny discs. We're getting into Dr. Diane Pasulka territory here. In 1973, there were reports of 9-foot-tall humanoids walking down the street in Pennsylvania. In 1969, there were reports of dinosaurs seen in Texas. Same thing in 1970 in Italy. So he researched these witnesses. He says, I'm not going to pay attention to what they saw. I want to see what's up with these people. And he saw they all, after their sightings, shared similar side effects. Temporary amnesia, severe headaches, muscle spasms, excessive thirst. And these symptoms are also reported with religious experiences, with the experience of demons, occult phenomena, and fairies. So he highlights a sighting that's common to all cultures throughout history, often called the devil. This is an entity that appears all in black, on a black horse, or later in a black carriage, or even later in a black hearse or a black Cadillac. And it is also seen stepping out of flying saucers. I didn't know that. It's human looking. They often describe something similar. It has high cheekbones, long tapered fingers, almond-shaped eyes, and kind of a strange complexion. Nobody seems to agree. Is it reddish? Is it olive? Is it kind of a dusky, not gray, but not yellow, and not orangey, but just some difficult to describe color. These entities that appear will often be able to speak any language, all languages, but kind of mechanically. They often have trouble breathing. They wheeze and they gasp. They leave the track of footprints that end suddenly. So after they're gone, you can follow where they walked, but suddenly it's like they disappeared into thin air. The footprints just stop and don't go any farther. So Keel says he spent about 25 years looking at these reports. Now, he wrote this in 75, so we're talking since 1950. So he was in on this from, pretty much the modern beginning, roughly. He went to Tibet. He's been all over the world researching this, ending up in West Virginia, from the sublime to the ridiculous. No offense, West Virginia. And he says there's just stories of all sorts of weird phenomena, from yetis to birdmen and everything in between. He does not believe in the extraterrestrial hypotheses. Now, he's starting to talk about what Jacques Vallée and Diane Pasulka posited, possibility. He says he believes that these are forces that are part of the Earth environment. They're not extraterrestrial. They're ultra-terrestrial. They coexist here in some sort of different time frame, not in our space-time continuum, but they can cross into it. Now, this to me sounds like the parallel universe theory of Philip K. Dick, who at the time, I doubt that he was extremely well known. Not in any way with the notoriety he has now, anyway. We're talking, early to mid 60s. He says this is not really a state, another place. It's a state of energy. And so I kind of put in parentheses, we're talking about a vibe here. We're talking about vibrations. He says the idea of a UFO is a small part of the story. So there's two parts to all of these stories. They're associated with lights that have some sort of intelligence. In other words, the lights seem to have a purpose. They don't just glow. They follow people. They shoot out and beam on people. He says if a beam of light hits a person, often they experience later a change in personality. Their IQ gets higher, or they make big life changes, jobs, marriages, etc. And sometimes they develop new gifts, like, psychic gifts is what he's talking about. He says this is very similar to what's called a mystical illumination in religious terms. You see it in Renaissance paintings. Mary's on her knees praying, and this beam of light is coming down from the sky. So the example he gives is from the Bible, the road to Damascus. Saul is on his way. I think he was on his way to kill Christians. He was on his way and got hit by a beam of light. I think that's when the cross appeared in the sky and said, in hoc signum, I think, by use of the sign or under the banner of the sign, in other words, he went blind. He was blind for 3 days. And after that, he converted and, became St. Paul. So that's the first part of the phenomenon, is this inexplicable light. And the second part is the cover story that camouflages the first. So that light with ability to affect people in an inexplicable way is hidden behind stories. So we get things like Marian apparitions or ETs or UFOs. And he says these are actually transmogrifications. I misspelled that 3 times and gave up. Transmogrification, that means changing the whole meaning and appearance of something, of this energy, whatever it is, that's under extra dimensional control. So he believes that they control events by manipulating people through mystical illumination. Okay. So the ancient Ethiopians, the Greeks, the Romans, indigenous people, Egyptians, they're all were affected by these lights, and they describe them in association with their gods, their religions, because they needed a way to explain it. He believes the narrative had to be modified in the industrial age. People were not quite so predisposed to, gods in the sky. They needed a new frame of reference. And so what do we end up with? We end up with first flying ships, then flying planes and flying wings on people, and then UFOs. But the point is to prevent us from understanding the true nature and purpose of this phenomenon. For a long time, people thought UFOs were the Air Force and the government in cahoots. He believes that the source of these phenomena have, whoever's producing them, they've been using them as the foundation of all religions throughout time, all occult beliefs, all philosophical beliefs, and all cultures. The Chinese call these lights dragon tracks because scary dragons appeared with them. Fairy lights have always been associated with little people in both Europe and North America. Witchcraft, he even talks about this. He said, set aside the misogyny and the political stuff. Witchcraft, scares in the past, they would see somebody flying through the air on something they called a broom, and always had lights, lanterns they called them, because that was their frame of reference. But you have an object, with or without people, flying through the air with lights on it. In 1475, you saw witches, and in 1975, you saw flying saucers. He said, this has all got to do with your frame of reference, your cultural brainwashing and propaganda. He said, modern times, we've been prepared for this since, since Jules Verne, really, but comic books, movies, TV shows, radio, and then constant reporting on the part of those groups, different groups of people who want to say that the Air Force and the government are in cahoots. I guess we'd call them conspiracy theorists. Just because it's a conspiracy, that just means breathing together. That just means people working together. It doesn't mean it's false. The word conspiracy no more means something is false than the word occult means it's evil. Just incorrect terminology, really. So this is people that think there's some sinister truth in the hands of the government. The gods of ancient Greece, he said, are here again to save us from ourselves. Believe it. And then he says in the next breath that belief is the enemy. People in the Middle Ages had a firm belief in little people who lived underground in palaces. And today, a lot of us are just convinced of ETs with glass cities on other planets. And in 100 years, he says, what will the next new game be? So the lights and the strange entities will still be here, but with a new presentation and a new explanation. October of 1966 began the first West Virginia sightings of a month-long flap of sightings. An attorney in West Virginia was in his car with his family at night, and a light came out of the sky, approached the car. It was an oblong object. It had windows in it and revolving lights. It just kind of flew around them and then flew away. This sort of thing began to be seen all over West Virginia that month. Neighbors actually began warning one another, hey, Mary, 2 blocks away, they're seeing a flying saucer. Sure enough, everybody go outside and look at the flying saucer. Interestingly enough, though, these stories did not show up in the newspapers often. People either were embarrassed or afraid to get caught up in this weird thing. They didn't want people to think poorly of them or look at them askance or perhaps feel they needed a little help. They were worried about their professional reputations. And the newspapers often were like, listen, we're serious journalists here. We're not going to get into this nonsense. And that really was the attitude. November 2nd of 1966, 2 men were driving home. They'd been at work out of the area. They were returning to Point Pleasant in West Virginia. They were on the interstate. Suddenly, and you get the impression these are not really inhabited, occupied roads. There's a lot of wilderness, rural, and not much in the way of human infrastructure. They saw an oblong object that appeared and it descended from the sky in front of their car. And so they stopped and it was just there, not moving in front of their car. And a guy got out of the object. He looked normal. He was grinning at them. He wore a black coat. He had his arms folded across his chest and his hands under his armpits, I think they're implying he was hiding his hands. He came up to their car window and he asked the men, who are you guys? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you doing? And then he says, what time is it? Then he got back in the object and flew away. Doesn't say how they responded. The men were upset at this encounter, too upset to tell anybody. They decided, no, we're not going to talk. But then they began to have weird symptoms. They couldn't sleep. And then when they did sleep, they had terrible nightmares. One guy, he began to drink heavily, which was very much out of character. It wasn't typical for him. He eventually, because they were from Point Pleasant, remember, he eventually went to the newspaper and talked to Mary Hyre and told her the whole story. And so she's sitting on the story 24 hours later thinking, what am I going to do with the story? When she got a phone call and it was the guy's son and he begged her, please don't print that story. So she didn't. Weeks later, she told the story to the author, John Keel. And they decided to call the guy. They called the man who had experienced this and he verified the story. Now, this is what he said. He said, look, don't use my name. I don't want to get involved in this thing. That scientist fellow told me, and they interrupted him. And they said, well, what scientist fellow? And the old guy said, a couple of weeks after this thing happened, a scientist from Ohio came to see me. He told us it would be better if we forgot the whole incident. And John Keel asked him, well, how did he know about it? How did he hear about it? How did he find you? And the man said, well, damned if I know. And Keel says, did he identify himself? And the man said, sure, but I can't remember his name, but he seemed to know what he was talking about. Keel couldn't get much out of him. He said, I would have ignored the story except for one really jarring fact. The same thing happened that same night on that same road to another person from the area. But he went to the police with the story. There was a press conference, and he got catapulted into the never, never land of UFO contactees, the center of one of the biggest UFO stories of 1966. That's where the story ends, and I'm going to stop here. I don't want to start the whole next chapter. It's a little short video, but I'll give you guys a little break. Thank you. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. These books don't attract a lot of listeners, but those who need to hear it will. That's my philosophy. And I know that there are people who really, really enjoy it. So I do it for you guys. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And please don't forget to come back next Saturday when we continue this exploration of the Mothman. And in the meantime, slán go fóill, sláinte. Watch out for guys flying around in the dark at night.